Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Carl Jung. This phrase opens a gateway to a reflection that few dare to confront. In a world where entertainment is everywhere, the unsettling question we must raise is simple. Could what was meant to enrich us actually be reducing our capacity to think? Pause for a moment. How many hours have you already spent consuming something that left no lasting mark on your life? Nothing more than an empty instant of distraction. Modern entertainment has evolved into far more than leisure. It has become a cultural addiction, shaping not only our choices, but also the way we think, feel, and even build our sense of identity. By accepting constant spectacle as the norm, we run the risk of forgetting what it means to reflect with depth. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." Friedrich Nietzsche. This thought stands as a warning because when we elevate immediate pleasure as life's ultimate goal, we begin to justify any form of escape from reality. And in this endless pursuit of diversions, we lose contact with what truly matters. Yet there is something we must understand. The problem is not only what we consume, but how we consume it. Hidden in that detail lies the key to a cultural transformation. If you continue with me on this journey, you will uncover how we arrived at this moment, and more importantly, how we can reverse its impact before it is too late. This reflection leads us directly to the first essential point, when cultural critic Neil Postman revealed how spectacle became the lens through which we perceive reality. The spectacle as the lens of reality. We now live in an age where entertainment has ceased to be mere leisure and has instead become the filter through which we interpret nearly everything. This observation was brilliantly explored by educator and cultural critic Neil Postman in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. He showed how core aspects of life, politics, religion, education, sports, and even commerce, were gradually transformed into extensions of spectacle. According to Postman, this shift unfolded with little collective resistance. Television, during the time he wrote, had taken the role of cultural arbiter, dictating how we perceive the world. What was once built upon written words, logic, and reason came to be mediated by quick images and simplified narratives. And here lies Postman's central warning. It is not only what we consume, but how we consume it that defines who we are as a society. Neil Postman. This statement makes clear that the transformation is not just about content, but about the very format of consumption itself. Technology, far from being neutral, carries profound implications, shaping the very way we perceive reality. The result is a society increasingly distracted, enchanted by glowing screens and pre-packaged stories, unaware that its capacity for critical reflection is being eroded. The logic of spectacle replaces the logic of reflection. In doing so, we abandon the effort to truly understand and instead settle for absorbing images that entertain us. At this point emerges a subtle danger. The more we embrace passivity, the more we lose the ability to question. And when questioning ceases, we become vulnerable to accepting any narrative placed before us. This vulnerability is not only cultural, but also psychological. It is precisely here that Carl Jung's analysis becomes essential, exposing how the excess of distractions functions as an escape from confronting our own inner shadow. The psychology of distraction. If Neil Postman warns us about how spectacle shapes culture, Carl Gustav Jung helps us understand the psychological effects of this phenomenon on our inner life. When we pursue entertainment endlessly, we often fail to realize that we are actually trying to escape from ourselves. The excess of distractions acts as a collective defense mechanism. By immersing ourselves in series, shows, games, and social networks, we avoid confronting what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious part of our personality that holds repressed desires, painful memories, and truths we refuse to admit. What you resist persists. What you give attention to grows, Carl Jung. This phrase reveals that the more we attempt to flee from our inner reality through immediate pleasure, the more we strengthen what we are trying to conceal. Entertainment, in this context, ceases to be just an innocent distraction and becomes a veil covering the necessity of self-knowledge. Instead of reflecting on our dilemmas, we surrender to a flood of stimuli that numbs the mind. This numbness produces the illusion of well-being, but deep down reinforces superficiality and our inability to face inner silence. You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. Addiction to entertainment, therefore, not only molds culture but also weakens the individual. It prevents one from confronting personal darkness, robbing them of the opportunity for psychological and spiritual growth. This escape has direct consequences on the way we think. As we grow accustomed to easy and pleasurable stimuli, we lose the willingness to engage in intellectual effort. It is at this point that the decline of critical thought begins to reveal itself. The decline of critical thinking. For centuries, reading was the foundation of deep learning. Opening a book invites us to face abstract ideas, organize thoughts, and build complex reasoning. Reading demands silence, attention, and intellectual effort. It is a solitary activity that forces us to engage with concepts without the help of instant images. Neil Postman observed this difference with great clarity. For him, television democratized access to information, but at the same time, simplified the process of learning. While reading challenges us to understand, television places us in a passive role, mere receivers of visual stimuli that require no reflection. He highlighted a revealing expression: "For the less intelligent, it must be drawn." Neil Postman. This phrase synthesizes the contrast between a culture of the written word and a culture of the image. The first invites reasoning, the second encourages simplification. This cultural shift directly impacts our capacity for critical thinking. The more we grow accustomed to consuming fast, fragmented information, the harder it becomes to handle dense concepts and profound analysis. Constant entertainment offers mental shortcuts that, in reality, weaken the muscles of logic. Carl Jung reminds us that human development is deeply connected to the willingness to confront what is difficult. Engagement with complexity strengthens the mind, just as facing the shadow strengthens the soul. If we avoid intellectual effort, we remain on the surface of experience, unable to perceive what lies beyond the immediate. The decline of critical thought is not only a cultural phenomenon, but also a psychological crisis. It makes us more vulnerable to manipulation, less equipped to discern truth, and incapable of constructing a solid worldview. As we immerse ourselves further into this scenario, we begin to see how the written word has been replaced by the image, and how this transformation has reshaped our perception of reality. The age of image and the loss of the word. Before the rise of television and the dominance of visual culture, public figures were remembered for their ideas, speeches, and writings. The word stood at the center of culture and public life. It demanded reasoning, depth, and clarity of thought. However, with the consolidation of image-driven culture, this logic changed dramatically. Today, we no longer remember great leaders for their writings, but for their faces. Politics ceased to be an arena of ideas and became a stage of appearances. Content gave way to form, and reflection was replaced by visual impact. Neil Postman emphasized that this transformation turned television into the guardian of the public sphere, where everything inevitably passes through its filter. This shift is not limited to politics. Religion, education, and even science were gradually reshaped by this same logic. What should have been profound and transformative was converted into something digestible, designed to entertain, and entertainment in turn became the lens that defines what we consider relevant. Carl Jung warned that superficiality is dangerous for human development. He wrote, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Carl Jung. This reflection shows that without delving into depth, Societies grow only in appearance, without firm roots. The age of image has brought access and speed, but it has also reduced our tolerance for complexity. Instead of challenging us to think, it conditioned us to consume. A culture that thrives on images also thrives on surfaces, always chasing the next spectacle. And when entertainment assumes such centrality, it begins to occupy spaces that once belonged to spirituality and the sacred. Entertainment as the new religion. In many ancient cultures, religion represented the bridge between the human and the divine. It offered rituals, traditions, and theologies that gave life meaning. However, in the age of television and new media, this depth was gradually replaced by a lighter, more superficial, and easily consumable format. The result is that religion, like many other areas, was converted into spectacle. Neil Postman observed how spiritual entertainment began to rise, transforming sermons, services, and celebrations into performances aimed at pleasing an audience. Transcendence gave way to distraction. The sacred was diluted into a product adapted to the rules of the society of spectacle. This change, though often subtle, reshapes the way we perceive spirituality. What once invited introspection and reverence now competes with shows, programs, and advertisements for the same space of attention. Instead of awakening consciousness, it seeks only to capture viewership. Spiritual emptiness cannot be filled with amusements. It demands meaning. Carl Jung. When we replace the search for meaning with constant doses of entertainment, we inevitably drift away from our very essence. This critique connects directly with Aldous Huxley's vision in Brave New World. In that work, the danger was not oppression, but superficial pleasure that numbs the soul. In a society that transforms everything into spectacle, religion cannot escape becoming just another consumer product, losing its transformative depth. And this same logic extends to knowledge. Entertainment, by dominating the way we access information, creates the illusion that we are more informed than ever. But the reality is quite different. We live surrounded by misinformation. Disinformation and the illusion of knowledge. In today's world, we are surrounded by an ocean of information. News reaches us in seconds, content is produced on an industrial scale, and it seems as though we have more access to knowledge than ever before. Yet Neil Postman warns us of a dangerous phenomenon: disinformation. For Postman, disinformation is not simply the absence of information, nor is it always an outright lie. It is something more subtle: the presentation of fragmented, decontextualized, and superficial data that gives us the impression of being well informed when, in reality, we are only consuming loose pieces of a larger reality. It is as if we were given fragments of a puzzle without ever seeing the complete picture. This dynamic turns the act of informing oneself into an illusory experience. We watch, read, or scroll through screens and believe we understand the world, but what we truly absorb are scattered fragments. Entertainment in this process acts as a filter that simplifies and impoverishes content. Carl Jung had already warned of this danger when analyzing mass behavior. He wrote, "The masses are always easy prey for any kind of suggestion. When reason sleeps, the collective shadow takes control." Carl Jung. This statement illustrates how superficiality and collective distraction make us vulnerable to manipulation. In a society that confuses information with knowledge, we run the risk of losing our ability for critical analysis. The excess of fragments creates a false sense of mastery over facts, but without the depth to understand the connections between them. This is the perfect ground for simplistic ideas to flourish. It is also the environment that confirms the warnings of thinkers like Aldous Huxley and George Orwell, who foresaw futures shaped not only by the control of information, but also by the trivialization of knowledge. At this point, a revealing comparison arises between two visions of the future that seem increasingly present in our reality. The clash between Orwell and Huxley. Neil Postman, in his cultural analysis, turns to two of literature's greatest visionaries, George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. Both imagined dark futures, but in very different ways. Orwell in 1984 feared a world where books would be banned, truth hidden, and information strictly controlled by the state. Huxley, in Brave New World, on the other hand, envisioned a world where prohibitions would be unnecessary because we would willingly distract ourselves with shallow and meaningless pleasures. Postman affirms that while Orwell feared the tyranny of oppression, Huxley warned of the danger of triviality. And when we look at our reality, it is hard not to see how prophetic Huxley was. We are surrounded not by direct censorship, but by a flood of distractions that dilute the seriousness of facts. While Orwell warned of a culture imprisoned, Huxley warned us against a culture trivialized. Neil Postman. This contrast reveals that we do not need chains to lose our freedom. It is enough to grow accustomed to spectacle, to endless amusement, and to set aside reflection. Entertainment becomes a means of control more effective than any authoritarian regime, because it imposes nothing. It only needs to offer pleasure. Here we can recall Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." Friedrich Nietzsche. When applied to our context, this phrase shows how even pleasure, when pursued without measure, can become destructive. Modern society, enamored with entertainment, crosses the line between the healthy and the devastating. This reflection leads us to a decisive question. How can we awaken consciousness in a culture that prefers to laugh rather than think? The awakening of consciousness. Reaching this point is already a sign of resistance. In a world where haste and distraction dictate the rhythm, pausing to reflect becomes a rare and transformative act. Neil Postman once stated that the true challenge is not merely the amount of information available, but the ability to discern what truly matters. He argued that the danger does not lie in the lack of news, but in the redefinition of what it means to be well-informed. This is a call to reclaim our commitment to depth, to the written word, and to critical reflection. It is an invitation to rediscover the value of reading, silence, and introspection. Instead of passively consuming the spectacle, we must relearn how to construct ideas, to question, and to seek meaning. Carl Jung reminds us of this essential task when he declared, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Carl Jung. This statement challenges us to face what we avoid, to confront the shadow we carry within, rather than escaping into endless distractions. And Postman reinforces the importance of this effort by affirming that you are a rarity in a world that constantly pushes us toward distractions. Neil Postman. The ability to stop, reflect, and delve deeper is both an act of courage and an expression of freedom. The awakening of consciousness does not mean abandoning entertainment, but rather learning how to balance it with reflection. It means not allowing immediate pleasure to become the foundation of life. It is understanding that growth only comes through effort, silence, and self-knowledge. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. May this reflection mark the beginning of an awakening, not only individually but collectively. If this reflection resonated with you, do not let it end here. Share this video with someone who also needs to awaken amidst the avalanche of distractions. Subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and join us on a journey of questioning and transformation. Remember, every choice you make in relation to what you consume shapes who you are becoming. Entertainment can either be mere escape, or it can serve as the starting point for something greater. The decision is in your hands.